Hello friends, welcome to our lecture series on CSR, and in this very series we have been talking about SBSR, that is Small Business Social Responsibility, and this is going to be part 2 of our lectures on SBSR, that is Small Business Social Responsibilities. We have been discussing about the point of differences between the large business houses and small business enterprises, and in due course of our discussion we were talking about the contemporary researches, that what the relevant research in this field speaks about the SBSR, what is their idea of making a differentiation between the small business enterprises and large business enterprises. So continuing that discussion, let me tell you what the contemporary research indicate about the SBSR. They tend to cast a more positive light on these special features, and they reflect on the relative advantages of small businesses. And there is a researcher called Perini, and in their research there was a group of researchers which is known as Perini et al. They have described small businesses as being generally independent, and they basically perform multiple tasks at one point of time, and they are cash limited. So this is a point which they wanted to highlight here, that they are not only cash limited, but they are also into multitasking. So one person might be performing multiple duties at one point of time, and they are generally independent in their decision making process. And based on their personal relationships and informality, these business houses, they are actively managed by the owners. And while managing those affairs, since they are personally involved into that business, it is highly personalized and largely local in their area of operation, and they are dependent on internal sources to finance their growth, because they basically either use their own capital, or they basically borrow it from their friends and relatives. So since the entire funding is being done by their internal sources or internal resources, they are supposed to be highly personalized. Their way of operation is supposed to be highly informal, and they are there into the cost cutting process also. Cost is something which is always a very significant point for these small business houses, and that is why when we have a discussion on the point of difference between the large business houses and small business houses, cost is a point and the way of operation is. These are the two important points of differences, and researchers, they have also recognized the same in due course of time. There is another research by Wynarczyk, which seeks to distinguish small businesses from large enterprises along three different dimensions. So they have taken three different dimensions. So my dear learners, you might be witnessing that different researchers, they have differentiated small and big business houses on different parameters, on different dimensions. So after having a discussion on this, I'll tell you about the commonality, that what is the common point, what is that point where each and every research has agreed, or what are those points which are basically common in all researches. That also I'll tell you. So the first point which they talk about is uncertainty, and then innovation, and third one is evolution. According to them, it is peculiar to small businesses, the uncertainty with which they are working, innovation to which they are accustomed. So they are also into the process of innovating, although to a limited extent, and the evolution. And in doing so, they have also presented an evaluation of how these idiosyncrasies, they could give small businesses advantage over large firms. So at times these idiosyncrasies, they are of immense advantage to small business houses as compared to that of their large counterparts. So those points are to be discussed here, and these characteristics, they might offer a mixed impression of small businesses, as the very feature that suggests the sense of inferiority of small businesses in comparison to that of their large counterpart, it proves to be advantageous for small businesses. So they should not have that feeling of inferiority from that of their large counterpart, because they have certain advantages also. So the point of difference which we could find somewhere is basically the size in which they are working, the size to which they are dealing, and it can be in terms of employment opportunities, the number of people who are working in your company, it can be the capital which is being invested into your firm, and the third one is your turnover. So capital, employees and turnover, these three are basically the line of differences between the small and large business houses. So after going through the entire significant researches which are being conducted in the field of CSR, we could make out that it is only the size of investment, because investment is something which is going to decide your turnover and eventually your employees. So if you take up investment only as a point of difference, your job is done. So the question comes from CSR to SBSR, what is different? In what way we are going to differentiate CSR with that of SBSR? Apparently speaking, there is no such difference. The difference can be in the way of operating. So if you compare it to a journey, the mode of journey may be different, but destination is the same. So both are supposed to reach to the same place, to the same destination. It is only the way to which they are resorting that is different. So the way which they are taking for reaching to their destination, that is something which is different. And from previous researches, we may identify a number of areas in which small business differences are important in terms of social responsibility orientation. And those differences are in terms of approach to the business case of CSR. What is your approach to the business case for CSR? What is the way you basically look at the governance for the social responsibility, and the language which you are using to reflect your social responsiveness. Who are your key stakeholders? Which stakeholders are key, and the importance, the significance of trust, network and social capital, and along with that the tools which we are going to use in managing social responsibility. So these are basically the points where we are basically different as a small business enterprise from that of our large counterparts. So one is the type of business, the size of business, which is creating a line of difference, and the second is the way we are moving ahead towards achievement of this very goal of social responsibility. So let us take up these points one by one. I will be starting from the first point, that is governing for social responsibility, how it is different. Governing for social responsibility. So recently we have been witnessing the new governance models. They have emerged as the business is increasingly expected and required to formalize its policies and practices. And now even these small business houses, they do have their clearly defined vision, mission, policy statements, responsibilities and their accountabilities for internal and external stakeholders. They do have their own code of conduct. They talk about systematic quality assurance models which they are applying into their business operations, and it is assumed to be necessary for professional operation of their business enterprises. So this movement has basically influenced the field of social responsibility, and increasingly we need a formalized standard management oriented approach. Even small business houses, they do have their own formalized standard management oriented approach which is composed of their measures, the reports, the audits, and their evaluation is considered to be benchmark for effective socially responsible behavior. So when we look at governing for social responsibility, earlier these small business houses, they were basically running informally, they were basically operating informally, but now they do understand the significance of a significant systematic framework of business operations, their defined goals, their objectives, their vision, mission, their policy document. So proponents of this approach, basically they promote it by giving an argument that by making the firm's activities public and transparent, the firms will be triggered to act more and more responsibly in terms of their social concerns towards their social responsibility. And for them, the informal initiatives lack credibility and value, because they do understand that informally whatever initiative you are taking, they basically lack in terms of their credibility and the value which they are generating. So it is good that they should have a formal system of governance. So the main argument, the key argument which is coming out of this discussion is that if a firm need to obtain its license to operate and gain competitive advantage, it needs to formalize its strategy. Your strategy need to be formal. You should have a formal defined strategy for anything, and at least for CSR you should have. So it has led to the dominance of the concept of social responsibility from one which was addressing the ethical concern into that which is driven by the logic of compliance and standardization, intended for external analysts to gain competitiveness. So if you really wish to emerge as a competitive entity for in terms of your social responsiveness, you need to basically look at the compliance. You need to have your defined goals. You should comply with those norms and standards, set a standard for yourself and comply with those standards. So logic of compliance and standardization, that is actually helping us in gaining competitiveness, the competitive advantage. So earlier these small business houses, they were only having ethical concerns, and now in terms of their governance they talk about logic of compliance. So unlike large corporations, small businesses do not formally report on their social and environmental matters. They formally don't report like those big business houses, but it doesn't mean that they are not engaged in responsible activities. Perhaps those activities may not be as quantifiable or easily identifiable as in case of large firms, and the basic reason which I trace to this problem is, it is because of the small business context. Their small business context, limited relevance to their traditional theories and approaches of business ethics and CSR. So their size is basically acting as a hurdle. So whatever contribution they are making, it may be a little step, but that doesn't mean that they are not contributing. And we have witnessed, even informally, that most of the small business houses, they are basically contributing towards the social responsibility. They are meeting out those social responsibility in their own manner, but they are not recording. They are not having a formal system. Whereas in some of the large business houses, we have witnessed that they are working for the sake of reporting everything. So these are two extremes. These small business houses, they are basically doing something. Even the quantity is very small, the extent of impact which they are generating may be very small, very little, but they are doing so, but they are not recording. On the contrary, some of the big business enterprises, they are basically starting their journey with the reporting. So they have a reporting framework first, and later on, whether it is done or not, what is the ground reality, whether the benefit has reached to the real beneficiary or not, that is not their business. They basically believe into the reporting, and it is not to blame any business enterprise. It is only because of their structure. It is only because of the sense of reporting only. They don't have that emotional connect with the society, because they are acting as an employee. As I told you, that the basic difference, the key difference between small and big business houses is the kind of involvement they have. They are more personalized in case of small businesses, whereas in case of big business houses, it is more of a formal system. So that is a line of difference. So what is needed here? The need of the hour is that the small business houses, whatever they are contributing, in whatever manner they are contributing towards the cause of society, or to reflect their social responsiveness, that need to be recorded, not only for the purpose of recording, but also for the purpose of reference, that in future when somebody else is working as an employee of your company, they should also understand that yes, what is the reason behind performing like this, what has been the impact of this small step which the firm has taken in the past. So there might be a limited relevance of their small business context, but yes, that every little step is equally important, and that is why the in terms of governance they differ from that of large business enterprises. But what is needed here is that they should report whatever they are doing. They should try to have a report, although it can be a informal report, but report has to be there. So this is the first point of difference in terms of their governance. The second is the business case. That what is their business case? The relationship between the social responsibility and competitiveness in small firm is very complex. and if you look at the relevant studies, some of the studies they have attempted to disentangle this complexity, and they have developed a business case for CSR, and they have prescribed socially responsible business practices as a source of competitive advantage, and it can be considered as a way to get social responsibility onto the business agenda. But remember, my dear learners, such approach could limit its extent, because it implies that only profitable socially responsible business practices, they should be implemented. So such kind of approach could limit its extent. The reason is very clear, that only profitable socially responsible business practices, they should be implemented. That becomes a motive. See, while doing something for the cause of society, the motive of profit should not come in between, because the objective is not to make profit. And you find that, on the contrary, the motivations and the ways in which small businesses engage with social responsibility, they suggest that rather than seeking to maximize profit, they are basically emotionally attached or involved towards that cause for which they are working. So they are, on the whole, the profit satisfier. The balance sheet is the key, and often engaged in the business for the sake of challenge and independence primarily. So this is also a line of difference, because large business houses, they are basically looking at the figures in the balance sheet. They have to look at the profit also. They have to report that whether they have spent on those parameters or not, on those points or not. Whereas in case of small firms, it is not the case, and for them what matters is the cost. For them, the cost is basically an important driving force, and the reason is very simple, because it is closely related to their cash flow and short-term welfare of the business, that is their profitability, and eventually the owners. So they always look at the cost, because whatever they are doing, even if they are doing something for the social welfare, there too they look at the cost. So many small businesses, since their failure is witnessed in the first 6 months or so. So the norm is success is simply defined as survival. If a small business house is surviving, it means it is making profit. So in order to survive, they have to make profit. They have to be mindful towards the cost. But yes, they are different here also in terms of business case, and this is why we need SBSR. Because if they are not reporting, if they are not reporting their CSR activities in a formal setup, that doesn't mean that they are not contributing towards social welfare, toward the social responsibility, or they have they have foregone their social responsibility. No, they do care about their social responsibility. But yes, the line of difference is, in case of large business houses, large companies, they have a formal setup of reporting, which is not there in case of small business houses. Second is the business case. The large business houses, they have their balance sheet. They look at the broad parameters of the balance sheet, whereas in case of small business houses, the simple norm is, if they are surviving, it means they are making profit, and if they are making profit, then of course they have to look a step ahead and see that in what manner they can contribute towards the social welfare, towards the well-being of the society. The third one is language, there is a very interesting research by Spence and Lozano. It states that owner managers, they do not often use jargon such as business ethics, sustainability, or CSR to denote their practices. So it was very interesting to find a straight pointed statement for big business houses, that they use the important terms, key terms like business ethics, sustainability, CSR in order to denote their practices, which is not present in case of small business houses. These small business houses, for them, their reference are embedded into their routine discourses, everyday discourse of the firm's habitual business practices. They are habitual of doing so, and they don't find any difference in terms of reporting. That they feel that, see, whatever we are doing, if I am doing something, if I am having a congenial workplace atmosphere for my employee, it is my duty. And we don't look at it from that perspective, and that is why they don't report. So that is also a point of difference. So the language which they are using to indicate their responsiveness towards society, it is entirely different, and for them it is a matter of fairness, integrity and excellence in management. They look at the CSR from a different perspective. They feel that if I am fair, my business is being run with honesty, integrity, and we are having excellent management system, or we are conducting businesses in a responsible manner, then my job is done. So the language which they are using, and for that they are not using any term like CSR or the or what you call as the sustainability. So notions removed from formalized CSR practices more readily attributed to large firms. So my dear learners, in understanding these differences, you should not be swayed away by this idea that big business houses, they are not contributing. They are contributing. I am just telling you the line of difference. Small business houses, since they differ in terms of their size, they differ in terms of their investment and turnover, they have a different way of operating their business or reporting their activities. So accordingly their language is bound to differ. So when we look at the operations of a small business enterprise and we try to find that to what extent they are socially responsible, then we need to understand their language. They are not going to use the term sustainability or CSR or what you call as the social responsiveness. They might be using fairness, integrity, excellence in management. So if you create a word cloud of those small business enterprises, the words may be different. And that is why at the very outset I told you that the way of journey is different, the way is different, but the destination is the same. So, and some researchers, they have concluded that they extend and promote the term small business social responsibility. They are basically saying that because of these differences, we need to extend and promote the term SBSR, that is small business social responsibility. And the reason which they attribute towards giving this nomenclature, this term, is that it delineates the context of small businesses from large corporations. Although they acknowledge that crossovers remain, you may find the same scenario in case of big business enterprises also, but yes, the point of difference is there. Before I go to another point of differences, there are certain questions which I feel appropriate to discuss here, because if you look at this entire notion or the concept of SBSR from the point of view of questioning, that what kind of questions which come in front of us is that is very important. What might be the barriers and triggers for small business responsibility implementation? If you look at the problem side of these small business enterprises, you will understand the entire story, that what might be the barriers and triggers for implementing SBSR. And if we understand those barriers and triggers, of course for that we need to understand the line of difference between the small and large business enterprises. The second question, do you think that the idea of SBSR might differ across different country contexts? Whether it is the same for the entire universe, or it may differ from nation to nation, from country to country. And if you think that they differ, so what are the differences in SBSR between developed and developing countries context? That is another question. How we are going to look at the SBSR in case of developing country vis-a-vis developed countries? How we are going to consider, that is another dimension of SBSR. To what extent, third question, to what extent can an owner manager control the SBSR practices within his or her firm? To what extent they can control these practices in their firm? Because the owner and manager, they are the same in case of small business houses. They can't afford to hire a manager, they can't afford to hire a CFO, they can't afford to hire a CEO. So CEO, CFO, owner, manager, everything is being performed by the same person, the same individual, because the size of business is very small. And the last aspect is, can gender of an owner manager influence the SBSR practices? Because there is a growing discussion on this, that whether the gender of the owner manager, it influences SBSR practices within the firm or not. So if you keep these questions in your mind, you will start thinking about the social responsibility of small business houses, that in what way they are going to implement, what are the barriers which they are witnessing while implementing their their entire objective of not only making profit but also surviving with the welfare of all stakeholders. So the next point is small business stakeholders. If we look at the stakeholders of small business, we find that the small business perspective of stakeholders and social responsibility is a deviation in some respects from that of their larger counterparts, and usually the main stakeholders of small business are family. If you look at any small business, basically their entire stakeholder, they belong to, they are either the part of their family, or the employees are some of the friends and relatives, some local competitors, suppliers, local community and customers are there as their stakeholders. So if you look at the stakeholders of small business houses, it is not like that of large business houses. They have their own family which is working, there are certain employees which are deployed into that business, there are small local competitors, and that too they are limited to a local area only, and their suppliers, their local community and customers. So if you look at the stakeholders of small business houses, you find that an owner manager is a primary decision maker, and they are not only acting as a principal but also as an agent, and they hold the central position in the stakeholders map. So owner manager is like an octopus who controls as well as manage firm related issues. So the one person is basically doing everything, and that is why we started our discussion with the notion of multitasking. And here is the point, that why they are supposed to be multitasking, because they cannot afford appointing different managers for different tasks. And as the boundary between the firm and the owner managers are small, the dynamics of these small firms activities is more likely a reflection of the characteristics, personality, beliefs or values of the manager. So the person who is basically running the business, the personality of that person, their belief, their values, it is going to be reflected into their behavior. Whereas in case of large firms, the character of leader is also reflected in the firm, but the existence of layers of bureaucracy and diffusion of ownership beyond a single or one or two people, it is basically less common than in case of small firms. So in case of big business enterprises, there is a huge list of people who are operating, who are going to execute that very idea. That is why you don't find the impact or reflection of belief, attitude or characteristics of one individual into the performance of organization, whereas in case of small businesses you find the same. The next line of difference is trust network and social capital. As we all understand that owner managers, they are embedded in a complex social hub. Their relationship with their suppliers and business partners is normally based on trust and mutual support. It is I personally feel that it is the biggest line of difference between the small and large business enterprises. In case of small businesses, their own trust with their stakeholders, their networking, they are basically acting as a social capital of theirs, and they are less likely to be defined by formal contracts or agreements than in case of larger firms. So they are less of formal, they are basically acting informally for the cause of the welfare of the society. So my dear learners, with these points of differences, I personally feel, after looking at the relevant literature on the very topic of small business responsibility, I find that yes, SBSR is needed, because we need to understand that most of the researchers, they have argued that SBSR is informal CSR or implicit CSR. Still there remains an interest in the formalization of SBSR, and some of the researchers, they have suggested that formalizing the socially responsible practices may bring advantages to these small businesses, and it includes improvement in the quality, production process, their employee relations and stakeholder relationship. So they feel that we should try to develop a formal model for these small business houses, and we should make it more formal. Although the size of these business houses are too small to implement it in the manner in which it is being implemented in case of big business houses, but yes, within those limitations, keeping those limitations in mind, if their activities can be formalized, they are basically contributing towards the social welfare of the society. So the importance of the perspective of the small firm is significant to understand SBSR. So it is another perspective of CSR, although their objective is the same. As I started my discussion with this, that they started with the same goal, the destination is the same, journey is different. I hope you must have enjoyed this very aspect of CSR, that is SBSR, in today's lecture of mine. Thank you so much.